My wife inherited millions overnight. The very next morning, she told me to pack my things. When I came home, divorce papers were waiting on the table. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Harry Klein had always believed that 12 years of marriage meant something. That consistency mattered. That showing up every day, doing the work, building a life together brick by brick, actually counted for something in the end. He was wrong. The truth arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March, delivered by a lawyer's voice through a speakerphone in their kitchen. But the real change had started earlier. Much earlier. Harry just hadn't wanted to see it. Cedar Falls, Iowa wasn't the kind of place where people dreamed of sudden riches. It was a town built on routines. Morning shifts at the factory, evening walks around the neighborhood, church potlucks, and high school football games. People here measured their worth by the steadiness of their paychecks and the reliability of their word. Harry had grown up understanding that value system. His father had worked at the same hardware store for 30 years. His mother had kept the same friends since elementary school. When Harry met Lori at a community college mixer, he'd seen that same practical streak in her. She wasn't flashy. She didn't demand the impossible. She seemed content with the small, solid things that made a life worth living. That version of Lori felt like a distant memory now. Harry stood in his sister's spare bedroom, staring at the boxes he'd packed 3 weeks ago. Each cardboard container held fragments of the life he'd built. Wedding photos, kitchen appliances they'd picked out together, books they'd read on quiet Sunday afternoons. All of it felt like evidence from someone else's existence. The room smelled like lavender air freshener and old carpet. His sister meant well, letting him stay here. But every morning he woke up in this narrow bed, surrounded by storage bins and exercise equipment she never used. Harry felt the weight of displacement pressing down on his chest. He'd been erased from his own life. The story of how it happened played on an endless loop in his mind. Every moment, every warning sign he'd missed, every time Lori's eyes had drifted past him, looking for something bigger, something more. It started 12 years ago, back when possibility still felt real. Harry had been working maintenance at Cedar Falls Community College for 6 years when he met Lori. She'd been taking night classes in early childhood education, trying to finish a degree she'd abandoned after high school. He'd noticed her one evening, struggling with a jammed locker in the hallway outside the library. "Need a hand?" he'd asked, already pulling his tool kit from his cart. She'd smiled at him, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and made her whole face soften. "I've been fighting with this thing for 10 minutes. I was about to give up." "Locks are stubborn," Harry had said, examining the mechanism. "But they usually have a reason. You just have to figure out what they're trying to tell you." He'd gotten the locker open in less than a minute. Lori had laughed, surprised and grateful. They'd started talking. Then they'd started meeting for coffee between her classes. Within 6 months, they were engaged. The wedding had been small. Immediate family and close friends packed into the basement of St. Mark's Lutheran Church. Her mother had cried. His father had given a short toast about commitment being more important than passion. Everyone had eaten casserole and sheet cake and danced to songs from the 80s. It had felt right. Simple. Real. Their first apartment had been a one-bedroom above a dry cleaner on Maple Street. The place always smelled faintly of chemicals and dryer sheets, but the rent was affordable and the landlord didn't ask too many questions when they painted the walls. Lori had worked part-time at her cousin's daycare while finishing her degree. Harry had picked up extra shifts doing evening maintenance at the college. Money had been tight, but not desperate. They'd learned to make it work. Friday nights were frozen pizza and whatever movie was on TV. Saturdays were for errands and yard sales. Sundays were reserved for dinner at her parents' house, where her mother would cook enough food to send them home with leftovers for the week. Lori used to joke about their life. "We're not fancy," she'd say, curled up next to him on her secondhand couch. "But we're steady, and steady feels good." Harry had believed her. He thought they wanted the same things. A paid-off mortgage eventually. Maybe kids down the road. Vacations that didn't require a credit card. The kind of comfortable, unremarkable happiness that came from knowing someone had your back. He'd been so sure they were building toward the same future. But looking back now, Harry could see the cracks. Small things, barely noticeable at first. The way Lori's expression would tighten when her friends talked about their vacations to Mexico or their new SUVs. The way she'd flip through home magazines and linger on pictures of houses they could never afford. The way she'd grown quieter during family dinners at her parents' house, as if the conversation bored her. He thought it was just normal restlessness. Everyone wondered about the life they weren't living. It didn't mean anything. Then Vernon died. Vernon had been Lori's uncle on her mother's side, a man who'd left Iowa in his 20s and never really looked back. He'd moved to Arizona, started some kind of consulting business, and lived alone in a house near Scottsdale. Lori had maybe seen him 5 times in her entire life. Christmas cards came sporadically. Phone calls were even rarer. When the lawyer called, Harry had been replacing a broken faucet in the upstairs bathroom. He'd heard Lori's phone ring in the kitchen, heard her answer it with her usual polite greeting. Then silence. Harry had wiped his hands on his jeans and walked downstairs. Lori was standing at the counter, phone pressed to her ear, eyes wide and unblinking. "Can you repeat that?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Harry had approached slowly, trying to read her expression. Shock, confusion, something else he couldn't identify. Lori had looked at him and mouthed the word speaker. Her hand trembled as she pressed the button. A man's voice filled the kitchen. Professional, measured, the kind of tone people used when delivering information that would change lives. "As I was saying, Mrs. Klein, your Uncle Vernon passed away 2 weeks ago. His will was very specific. He's left you the bulk of his estate. After taxes and final expenses, you're looking at approximately $3.2 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. Harry had felt his stomach drop, not from excitement, from something closer to dread. Some instinct deep in his gut told him this wasn't going to end well. Lori had covered her mouth with her free hand. Her eyes had started to water, but not from sadness. This was something else, something sharper. $3 million, she'd whispered. Slightly over, yes, the lawyer confirmed. There are some details we'll need to discuss regarding the estate settlement. Property holdings, investment accounts, that sort of thing. But the cash inheritance is substantial. When would you be available to come to Scottsdale to finalize the paperwork? Lori had scheduled the meeting for the following week. She'd thanked the lawyer. Into the call. Set the phone down carefully on the counter. Then she'd laughed. It wasn't the laugh Harry knew. Not the warm, surprised sound she made when something genuinely delighted her. This was higher, harder, almost manic. $3 million, she'd said, looking at Harry but not quite seeing him. $3 million, Harry. Do you understand what this means? It's a lot of money, Harry had said carefully. We should probably sit down and... I don't have to work at that daycare anymore, Lori interrupted. Her words came fast now, tumbling over each other. I don't have to ask my mother for help with groceries. I don't have to worry about the car breaking down or whether we can afford to fix the furnace. We weren't really struggling, Harry had pointed out. We were doing okay. Lori had looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her expression had made Harry's chest tighten. You think this is okay? She'd asked, gesturing around their modest kitchen. You think living paycheck to paycheck, shopping at thrift stores, driving cars with 200,000 miles on them is doing okay? It's honest work, Harry had said. It's a good life. It's a small life. Lori's voice had gone cold. I've been living small my whole life, Harry, and I'm done with it. That night, she hadn't asked what they should do with the money. She hadn't suggested they sit down together and make a plan. She'd gone upstairs and spent 3 hours on her laptop, looking at houses, at cars, at websites for jewelry and vacations and designer handbags. Harry had stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up dinner dishes that didn't need cleaning, try to understand what had just happened. The woman upstairs, scrolling through images of a life she suddenly believed she deserved, felt like a stranger. The change accelerated over the next week. It wasn't gradual. It was violent, like watching a dam break. Lori flew to Scottsdale on a Wednesday. She'd asked Harry if he wanted to come with her. The invitation felt like an afterthought, tossed out because it would have been weird not to offer. Harry had said yes anyway, hoping the trip might give them time to talk, to process this together. But Lori had spent most of the flight researching real estate in nicer parts of Cedar Falls. She pulled up listings on her phone, scrolling past houses with 3-car garages and swimming pools and finished basements. She'd barely spoken to him. The lawyer's office had been all glass and chrome, the kind of place designed to make people feel important. Vernon's estate had been more complicated than the initial phone call suggested. There were properties, investment accounts, a mess of paperwork that would take months to fully untangle. But the cash portion was real. $3.2 million. After taxes and fees, Lori would walk away with just over $2 million. On the flight home, she'd been different. Straighter posture, sharper tone. When the flight attendant had asked if she wanted anything to drink, Lori had ordered wine in a voice that expected immediate service. Harry had ordered water. "We should talk about what we want to do with this," Harry had tried, keeping his voice low and reasonable. "Maybe pay off the house. Set some aside for retirement. We could finally take that trip to—" "I'm buying a new house," Lori had cut him off. "Something in Oak Ridge Heights. For bedrooms at least. Maybe 5. With a proper kitchen and a yard that doesn't look like a vacant lot." Oak Ridge Heights was where the doctors and lawyers lived, where people drove luxury cars and hired landscaping companies instead of mowing their own grass. "That's a pretty big jump," Harry had said carefully. "Maybe we should start smaller. See how this feels before we—" "How it feels?" Lori had turned to look at him fully. Her eyes were bright, almost feverish. "It feels like I finally have options, Harry. It feels like I don't have to settle anymore." The word settle had hit Harry like a punch to the sternum. "Is that what you think we've been doing?" he'd asked. "Settling." Lori had looked away, out the airplane window at the clouds below. "I think I've been making the best of limited circumstances. Now, my circumstances aren't limited anymore." Harry had wanted to argue, to point out that money didn't change who you were, that the life they'd built together had value that couldn't be measured in dollars. But the set of Lori's jaw told him she wasn't interested in hearing it. So he'd stayed quiet. Back in Cedar Falls, things got worse. Lori had started looking at houses immediately. She'd hired a real estate agent, a woman named Patricia who drove a white BMW and wore suits that probably cost more than Harry's monthly paycheck. They'd spent entire weekends touring properties. Harry had gone along at first, trying to stay involved, trying to understand what Lori wanted. But it became clear pretty quickly that his opinion didn't matter. "This one has granite countertops," Patricia had said in one kitchen, running her manicured hand along the surface. "And the master suite has a walk-in closet and an en-suite bathroom with a soaking tub." "It's nice," Harry had offered, "but it's just the two of us. We don't really need 5 bedrooms, and—" "I like it," Lori had interrupted, not even looking at him. "Let's put in an offer." That had become the pattern. Lori decided. Patricia confirmed. Harry existed in the background, increasingly irrelevant. The shift wasn't just about money. It was about power, about control, about Lori finally being the one who got to make decisions without compromise. And with that power came a coldness Harry had never seen in her before. At a family dinner at her parents' house, Lori had corrected Harry in front of everyone when he'd mentioned looking at houses together. "Harry's been along for some of the viewings," she'd said, voice pleasant but dismissive. "But really, I'm the one making the decisions. It's my inheritance, after all." Her mother had looked uncomfortable. Her father had frowned. Harry had felt his face flush with embarrassment. Later, in the car on the way home, Harry had tried to address it. "That was kind of harsh back there," he'd said, "making it sound like I'm not part of this decision." "You're not." "Really," Lori had replied, eyes on the road. "I mean, you're free to have opinions. But at the end of the day, this is my money. My choice. We're married," Harry had reminded her. "What's yours is ours. That's how this works." Lori had pulled into their driveway and put the car in park. She turned to look at him, and her expression had been completely unreadable. "Is it though?" she'd asked. "Is that really how it works?" She'd gotten out of the car without waiting for an answer. That night, Harry had lain awake, listening to Lori breathe beside him in the darkness. They'd shared this bed for 12 years. He knew the sound of her sleeping, the way she curled on her left side, the small sighs she made when she dreamed. But lying there that night, she felt like a complete stranger. 2 weeks later, she'd told him to leave. Harry had come home from work on a Thursday to find Lori waiting for him in the kitchen. She'd been standing by the counter, arms crossed, expression calm and businesslike, like she was about to fire an underperforming employee. "We need to talk," she'd said. Harry had set down his keys. His work boots were still muddy from fixing a drainage issue behind the science building. He'd been looking forward to a shower and maybe some dinner. Something normal. Something that felt like the life he used to have. "Okay," he'd said. "What's up?" "This isn't working anymore," Lori had said simply. "You and me. This marriage. I need you to move out." The words had taken a moment to register. Harry had stood there, still holding his thermos, trying to process what he'd just heard. "Move out," he'd repeated slowly. "You want me to move out of our house?" "I want space," Lori had corrected. "I need room to figure out what comes next. And I can't do that with you here." "Lori, what are you talking about?" Harry had set the thermos down, moving closer. "If something's wrong, we can work on it. We can talk. We don't just throw away 12 years because—" "I'm not throwing anything away," Lori had interrupted. Her voice stayed level, almost bored. "I'm making a change. You can stay with your sister for a while. I'll cover whatever expenses you need. But I need you out of this house." Harry had felt like he was falling, like the floor had disappeared and he was plummeting through empty space. "Did I do something?" he'd asked. "Did I say something wrong? Just tell me what happened and we can." "You didn't do anything wrong, Harry." Lori had sighed, like she was explaining something obvious to a slow child. You're ordinary. You've always been ordinary. And I've spent 12 years being ordinary right alongside you. I'm done with that now." The word ordinary had echoed in Harry's head. He thought about all the times he'd fixed things in their house. All the mornings he'd woken up early to work extra shifts so they could afford a nicer vacation. All the small, steady ways he'd try to make their life better. Ordinary. So that's it. Harry had asked. You get some money and suddenly I'm not good enough anymore. "It's not about good enough," Lori had said. "It's about fit. And you don't fit with the life I'm building now." Harry had wanted to argue, to fight, to demand she explain how 12 years of marriage could be discarded like outdated furniture. But the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She'd already made up her mind. This wasn't a conversation. It was a notification. "When do you want me out?" Harry had asked quietly. "This weekend would be good," Lori had said. "I've already contacted a lawyer about the divorce paperwork. It'll be straightforward. I'm not asking for anything from you, and I'm sure you won't ask for anything from me." The divorce papers had arrived the next day. FedEx. Overnight delivery. Lori had already signed them. Harry had called his sister, packed his clothes, loaded boxes into his truck. The whole time, Lori had stayed upstairs, working on her laptop, planning the life she'd have without him. On his last night in the house, Harry had stood in their bedroom doorway. Lori had been sitting on the bed, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging his presence. "I loved you," Harry had said. "I still do. Whatever you think you need, whatever you think that money is going to give you, it won't make you happy." Lori had looked up at him. For just a second, something soft had flickered across her face. Something that looked almost like regret. Then it was gone. "You're probably right," she'd said. "But I'd rather find out for myself." Harry had left without another word. The divorce had been fast. Suspiciously fast. Harry suspected Lori had been planning it even before she'd told him to leave. She'd probably contacted the lawyer the same week she'd inherited the money. Maybe earlier. 3 months after he'd moved into his sister's spare room, the divorce was finalized. No contest. No arguments over assets. Lori had kept the house, the car, and everything else. Harry had taken his personal belongings and walked away clean. Everyone told him he should fight for half, that he was entitled to something after 12 years. But Harry didn't want her money. He wanted his dignity. And fighting over dollars felt like admitting the whole marriage had been a transaction. So he'd signed the papers and moved on. Except moving on turned out to be harder than he'd expected. Harry had kept working at the college. Same job, same routine, same faces. But everything felt hollow now. He'd go through his day on autopilot, fixing leaky pipes and broken locks, making small talk with professors and students who had no idea his entire life had imploded. His sister, Rachel, tried to help. She'd make him dinner, ask how he was doing, suggest he tried dating again. "You're a good guy, Harry," she'd say. "Any woman would be lucky to have you." But Harry wasn't interested. Not yet. Maybe not ever. At night, lying in the narrow bed in Rachel's spare room, Harry would replay the marriage in his mind, looking for the moment it had gone wrong. The exact second when Lori had stopped seeing him as a partner and started seeing him as an obstacle. He never found it, because maybe there wasn't one single moment. Maybe the truth was simpler and sadder than that. Maybe Lori had always wanted more, and Harry had just been convenient until something better came along. The money hadn't changed her. It had revealed her. Meanwhile, Lori was building her new life at full speed. Harry heard about it through the grapevine. Cedar Falls was small enough that gossip traveled fast. Friends of friends, co-workers who knew co-workers. Everyone had a story about what Lori Klein was up to these days. She bought the house in Oak Ridge Heights, a massive place with 5 bedrooms and a 3-car garage. She'd hired interior designers, bought new furniture, threw a housewarming party that half the town seemed to have attended. Harry hadn't been invited. Obviously, she'd also bought a new car, a silver Mercedes that she drove around town like a badge of honor. People noticed. People talked. Some were impressed. Others were quietly judgmental. But everyone had an opinion. Lori seemed to thrive on the attention. She'd also changed her appearance. Harry had seen her once from a distance outside the coffee shop downtown. She'd been wearing clothes he didn't recognize. Expensive looking. Designer brands. Her hair was different too. Styled and highlighted. She looked polished. Put together. Like someone auditioning for a life she'd seen in magazines. She'd been with a group of women Harry didn't know. They'd been laughing, talking loud enough to be heard across the street. Lori had seemed confident. Happy even. Harry had turned and walked the other way. But the stories kept coming. Lori had joined a country club. She'd started taking tennis lessons. She'd been seen at restaurants in Des Moines, places where entrees cost more than Harry made in a day. She was traveling too. Quick trips to Chicago. A weekend in Las Vegas. She was living fast and living loud, making sure everyone knew that she'd leveled up. Her family noticed the change too. Harry ran into Lori's father, Frank, at the hardware store one Saturday afternoon. Frank was a quiet man, a retired electrician who'd spent 40 years working steady jobs and saving carefully. He'd never been wealthy, but he'd never wanted to be. He valued different things. "Harry," Frank had said, approaching him in the paint aisle. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," Harry had replied honestly. "How about you?" Frank had shaken his head slowly. "I'm worried about Lori. She's not herself anymore. Or maybe she's too much herself. I don't know which is worse. She's making her own choices," Harry had said carefully. "That's what concerns me." Frank had picked up a paint can, examining it without really seeing it. "Money doesn't fix character, Harry. My brother Vernon had money his whole life, and he died alone in a house full of things he didn't need. I told Lori that. She didn't want to hear it." "What did she say?" Frank had set the paint can down. "She said character doesn't pay bills." Then she left. Haven't heard from her much since. Harry had felt a pang of sympathy for the older man. Frank had always been kind to him, had treated him like a son. Now he was watching his daughter turn into someone he didn't recognize. "I'm sorry," Harry had said. "Not your fault," Frank had replied. "You were good to her. Steady. That should have meant something." But hadn't. They both knew it. Harry tried to focus on his own life. He picked up extra shifts at the college. Started saving money again. Looked at apartments he could afford on his own. Small places. Nothing fancy, but his own space. Rachel supported the plan. "You need to start fresh," she'd said. "Get out of this spare room and build something for yourself." Harry had agreed, but some part of him was still waiting. Watching. Curious about how Lori's story would end. He didn't have to wait long. The first cracks started showing about 8 months after the divorce. Harry heard about it from a colleague at work whose wife knew someone who worked at the bank. Lori Klein came in trying to access funds that weren't there, the colleague had said during lunch. Apparently, there's some kind of freeze on her accounts. Tax issues or something. Harry had listened without commenting. It wasn't his business anymore, but he felt something stir in his chest. Not satisfaction exactly, more like vindication. A month later, more stories surfaced. Lori had hired financial advisors, expensive ones, people who charged thousands of dollars to tell her what she wanted to hear. They'd encouraged her to invest in opportunities that sounded good on paper, but turned out to be mirages. Real estate ventures that collapsed. Business partnerships that dissolved. Loans to friends who never paid her back. She'd been spending like the money was infinite. But it wasn't. Vernon's estate had been messier than anyone realized. There were debts, legal disputes, tax obligations that Vernon had ignored for years. The kind of financial landmines that rich people sometimes leave behind when they die without proper planning. Lori had assumed the inheritance was clean. That $3 million meant $3 million of freedom. But she'd been wrong. The IRS had frozen most of her accounts while they sorted through Vernon's back taxes. The money Lori had already spent, the house she'd bought, the lifestyle she'd been flaunting, had all been built on assumptions that were crumbling in real time. Harry heard she'd sold a Mercedes, that she'd stopped going to the country club, that the big house in Oak Ridge Heights was suddenly too expensive to maintain. People who'd been impressed by her sudden wealth were now quietly distancing themselves. The friends she'd bought with expensive dinners and generous loans were harder to find when she needed help. Lori was learning an old truth the hard way. Money could buy attention, but it couldn't buy loyalty. 18 months after the inheritance, Lori's world collapsed completely. Harry was replacing ceiling tiles in the student union when his phone rang. Lori's mother. Harry had stayed on decent terms with her, despite the divorce. She'd always been kind to him, had apologized more than once for her daughter's behavior. "Harry," she'd said, voice strained. "I don't know who else to call. Lori's in trouble." Harry had climbed down from the ladder, moving to a quieter corner. "What kind of trouble?" "Legal trouble. Financial trouble." Her mother's voice had cracked. "One of Vernon's former business partners is suing the estate. Something about debts Vernon owed. They're going after everything Lori inherited. The lawyers say she could lose it all." Harry had felt a strange calm settle over him, like watching a storm approach from a distance, knowing there was nothing you could do but wait for it to hit. "I'm sorry to hear that," he'd said honestly. "She won't talk to anyone," her mother had continued. "Not her father. Not me. She shut herself in that big house, and she won't answer calls. I'm scared, Harry. I'm scared of what she might do. Have you tried going over there?" "She won't open the door." Her mother had started crying softly. "She made such a mess, Harry. Such an awful mess. And now she's alone with it." Harry had wanted to feel triumph, to enjoy the cosmic justice of watching Lori's arrogance catch up with her. But standing there in the empty hallway, listening to her mother cry, he just felt tired. "I don't know how to help," Harry had said gently. "I'm not part of her life anymore." I know. I just thought." Her mother had trailed off. "I just thought maybe you'd want to know." After the call ended, Harry had stood there for a long time, staring at his phone. He'd wondered what Lori was thinking right now, sitting in that big, empty house she'd bought to prove she'd moved up in the world, surrounded by expensive furniture and designer clothes that suddenly meant nothing. Did she regret it? Did she think about the life she'd thrown away? Did she realize that ordinary had its own kind of value? Harry doubted it. People like Lori didn't do regret. They did justification. They found ways to blame circumstances, to explain away their choices, to avoid looking directly at their own reflection. Still, some small part of him hoped she'd learn something, that the pain of losing everything might teach her what having everything never could. But that wasn't his problem anymore. Harry had put his phone away and gone back to work. 3 months later, the lawsuit concluded. Lori lost. The judgment had been substantial enough to wipe out everything she had left. The house went into foreclosure. Her bank accounts were drained to pay legal fees and settlement costs. Even the furniture got sold off to cover debts. Within 2 years of receiving $3 million, Lori had less than nothing. She was in debt, homeless, starting from scratch in a way she'd never experienced before. Harry heard she'd moved back in with her parents temporarily. Frank and her mother had taken her in despite everything, because that's what parents did. But even they couldn't hide their disappointment. The town watched it all unfold with a mixture of sympathy and schadenfreude. Some people felt bad for Lori. Others thought she'd gotten exactly what she deserved. Most just shook their heads and used her story as a cautionary tale about what happened when people got too big for their circumstances. Harry try not to think about it. He'd moved into his own apartment by then, a modest one-bedroom on the east side of town. He'd furnished it slowly, deliberately, with things he actually needed rather than things meant to impress. His life was small again, but it was his, built on work he did and choices he made. Nobody could take that away from him. He'd started dating someone, a woman named Emily who worked in the college library. She was quiet, thoughtful. She liked crossword puzzles and old movies. She thought Harry's steadiness was a virtue, not a character flaw. Things were simple with Emily, uncomplicated. They took walks in the park, made dinner together, talked about books and music and what they wanted from life. It felt good. It felt real. Harry had begun to believe he might actually be okay. Then Laurie showed up at his door. It was a Saturday in November, cold enough that Harry had started wearing his winter jacket in the mornings. He'd been planning to spend the day cleaning his apartment, maybe watch some football later. The knock came around 10 in the morning. 3 soft taps, almost hesitant. Harry had been in the kitchen making coffee. He'd set down his mug and walked to the door, expecting maybe a delivery or a neighbor with a question. Instead, he found Laurie. She looked different. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by worn jeans and a coat that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no polish. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. But it was her eyes that caught Harry's attention. They were red, swollen. The arrogance that had burned so bright 2 years ago had been completely extinguished. "Harry," she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for a long time. Harry stood in the doorway, hands still on the door, processing her presence. Part of him had wondered if this moment would come. Another part had hoped it wouldn't. "Laurie," he said. His voice came out flat, neutral. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Please, just for a few minutes." Harry considered saying no, closing the door, ending this before it could start. But curiosity won out. He needed to hear what she'd say, needed to know if she'd learned anything from the wreckage she'd created. He stepped aside. "All right." Laurie walked into his apartment slowly, looking around like she was cataloging everything. The simple furniture, the clean but unremarkable space, the life Harry had built without her. "It's nice," she said. "Cozy." Harry closed the door, but didn't move further into the room. "What do you want, Laurie?" She turned to face him. Her composure cracked immediately. Tears started flowing before she even opened her mouth. "I'm sorry," she said. The words came out broken. "I'm so sorry, Harry. For everything. For how I treated you. For what I said. For throwing away what we had." Harry watched her cry. He felt no satisfaction from it. No vindication. Just a distant sadness for the waste of it all. "Okay," he said simply. "I didn't think it would end like this," Laurie continued, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "I thought the money would fix everything. I thought it would make me happy, but it just made everything worse." "Money doesn't change who you are," Harry said. "It just gives you more freedom to be yourself." Laurie flinched at that. I know that now. I was awful. I was so focused on having more that I didn't see what I already had, what I was throwing away." Harry crossed his arms, leaned against the wall, waited. "I lost everything," Laurie said. "The house, the money, my friends, my self-respect. I'm staying with my parents. I don't have a job. I don't have anything." "I'm sorry that happened to you," Harry said. And he meant it. He wasn't cruel. He didn't enjoy watching people suffer, even people who'd hurt him. Laurie took a step closer. "I know I don't deserve to ask. I know I have no right. But I need help, Harry. I need somewhere to stay. Just temporarily. Just until I can get back on my feet." There it was. The real reason for the visit. Harry had known it was coming. The tears, the apology, the confession of mistakes. They were all just preamble to this request. This assumption that despite everything, Harry would be her safety net. "My parents' place is too small," Laurie continued quickly, reading something in his expression. "And I can't stay there much longer. It's too hard, too humiliating. I just need a few weeks, maybe a month. I'll sleep on the couch. You won't even know I'm here." Harry looked at her, really looked at her, saw the desperation, the fear, the genuine belief that he might actually say yes. "No," he said quietly. Laurie blinked. "What?" "I said no." "Harry, please." Laurie's voice rose. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you. But we were married for 12 years. That has to count for something. Your family. Harry pushed off from the wall. Stood straighter. You decided I wasn't your problem the day you threw me out of our house, he said. His voice stayed calm. Even. You told me I was ordinary, that I didn't fit with the life you were building. You made it very clear that after 12 years, I didn't matter enough to keep around. I was wrong, Lori said desperately. I was stupid and selfish and wrong. But I've changed, Harry. I've learned. I know what really matters now. Do you? Harry asked. Or did you just run out of options? Lori reached for his arm. Harry stepped back before she could touch him. Don't do this, she said. Don't be cruel. I came here because you're a good person. Because you've always been kind and decent, and I thought you might help me. I was a good person when you kicked me out too, Harry replied. I was kind and decent when you told me I was ordinary. When you divorced me without a second thought. Where was your concern for my well-being then? I wasn't thinking clearly, Lori said. The money made me crazy. I wasn't myself. You were exactly yourself, Harry corrected. You were finally free to be exactly who you wanted to be without compromise. And that person didn't want me around. Lori's face crumpled. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Please, Harry, I'm begging you. I don't have anywhere else to go. You have your parents, Harry said. You have family who still care about you despite everything you put them through. That's more than a lot of people have. It's not enough, Lori whispered. I need more than that. Harry walked to the door, opened it. Cold November air rushed into the apartment. You chose money over loyalty, he said, looking back at her. You chose pride over partnership. You made it very clear that what we had wasn't valuable enough to keep. I made a mistake, Lori said. She was full-on sobbing now, shaking. People make mistakes. You have to forgive me. You have to. I don't have to do anything, Harry interrupted. His voice was still calm, still measured, but there was steel underneath. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them. Please don't do this, Lori begged. She moved toward the door. Toward him. I'm asking you. I'm asking for help. Harry held her gaze, saw all the fear and regret and desperate hope there, and felt absolutely nothing shift inside him. I'm not your husband anymore, he said. I'm not your friend. I'm not your safety net. You made sure of that. Harry, you threw me away like I was nothing, Harry continued. You told me I didn't fit, that I was holding you back. You made me pack my things and leave the home we'd built together because I wasn't good enough for the life you wanted. Lori was crying so hard now, she could barely speak. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, Harry said. Sorry doesn't undo what you did. Sorry doesn't mean I owe you anything now that you've run out of other people to use. He stepped aside, making the doorway clear. You need to leave, he said. Lori stood there, shaking, tears streaming down her face. Please, she whispered one more time. Please, Harry, you're all I have left. That's not my problem anymore. For a long moment, Lori just stared at him, waiting for him to crack, to soften, to be the kind, steady man who'd always been there when she needed him. But that man was gone. She'd killed him when she'd decided he wasn't worth keeping. Finally, Lori walked through the open door. She stopped on the small landing outside, turning back to look at him one last time. I hope you're happy, she said. There was no venom in it, just exhausted defeat. I'm getting there, Harry replied honestly. He closed the door. Not hard, not with anger, just final, complete. Through the door, he could hear Lori crying on the landing. Then footsteps, moving away, fading. Harry stood there for a long time, hands still on the doorknob, letting the weight of the moment settle. He'd wonder how he'd feel if this moment ever came. If he'd feel guilty. If he'd feel cruel. If some part of him would break at the sound of her crying. But he didn't feel any of those things. He felt free. Harry walked back to the kitchen. His coffee had gone cold, so he poured it out and made a fresh cup. He stood by the window, looking out at the gray November sky, letting his mind settle. The apartment was quiet, peaceful. His life was small and ordinary and completely his own. Nobody could take that from him. Nobody could use it against him. Nobody could throw it away because something shinier came along. He thought about Lori walking back to her car, going back to her parents' house, facing another day of consequences she'd never imagined when she'd been spending Vernon's money like it would last forever. Part of him felt sympathy for her. She'd made terrible choices and paid a terrible price. But sympathy didn't mean responsibility. He could acknowledge her pain without taking on himself. She'd made her bed. Now she had to lie in it. Harry's phone buzzed. A text from Emily asking if he still wanted to meet for lunch later. They planned to try a new restaurant downtown. Something simple. Nothing fancy. He texted back, "Absolutely. See you at noon." Life went on. That was the thing people didn't always understand about endings. When one chapter closed, another one started. Maybe quieter, maybe smaller, but still full of possibility. Harry had spent 2 years rebuilding himself, finding his footing, learning to trust his own worth again. He wasn't about to sacrifice that for someone who'd already proven they didn't value it. Over the next few weeks, Harry heard updates through the usual channels. Laurie had gotten a job at a grocery store. Nothing glamorous, minimum wage, but it was something. She was living with her parents, taking the bus because she couldn't afford a car, starting over from absolute zero. Some people in town felt bad for her. Others thought she deserved everything she got. Harry tried not to think about it much either way. Frank had called him once, a few days after Laurie's visit. "She told me what happened," Frank had said, "that she asked you for help, and you turned her down." Harry had braced himself for judgment, for disappointment, but Frank had surprised him. "Good," the older man had said. She needed to hear no. She needed to understand that there are consequences for treating people the way she treated you. "I didn't do it to teach her a lesson," Harry had replied. "I did it because I need to protect myself." "That's even better," Frank had said. "You have to look out for yourself, Harry. Nobody else is going to do it for you." They talked for a while longer. Frank had apologized again for his daughter's behavior, had told Harry he was proud of the way he'd handled everything, that staying strong in the face of someone else's desperation took real character. After that call, Harry had felt something loosen in his chest. He hadn't realized he'd been carrying Frank's potential judgment until it was lifted. Christmas came and went. Harry spent it with Rachel and her family. Emily had been invited too. They'd exchanged simple gifts, eaten too much food, played board games with Rachel's kids. It had been good, normal, the kind of holiday Harry had been missing for the past 2 years. In January, Harry got a promotion at work. Nothing huge, a slight bump in pay and a new title, but it felt significant, like forward momentum, like his life was actually progressing instead of just treading water. Emily moved in with him that spring. They'd been dating for almost a year, and it felt right. Natural. They merged their lives slowly, deliberately, making sure each step felt solid before taking the next one. The apartment became theirs. Their books on the shelves, their dishes in the cabinet, their routines and rhythms and shared quiet mornings. Harry had thought he'd never trust this kind of intimacy again. But Emily wasn't Laurie. She didn't measure her worth by what she owned or who she impressed. She valued stability, consistency, the small, steady things that made a life worth living. She saw Harry's ordinariness as a feature, not a bug. And that made all the difference. 2 years after Laurie had knocked on his door, Harry heard she'd left Cedar Falls, moved to Des Moines, found a better job, started building a new life away from the town where everyone knew her story. Harry hoped it worked out for her. He genuinely did. He didn't wish her more suffering. He just didn't want to be part of her recovery either. Some people thought that was cold, that he should have forgiven her, that holding boundaries was the same as holding grudges. But Harry knew better. Forgiveness didn't require sacrifice. He could wish her well without sacrificing his own peace. He could hope she learned and grew without being the one who had to teach her. She made her choices. He made his, and they both had to live with them. That was fair. That was just. That was enough. 5 years after the divorce, Harry married Emily in a small ceremony at the same church where he'd married Laurie. His father gave another toast about commitment being more important than passion. Rachel cried happy tears. Frank attended and shook Harry's hand with genuine warmth. Laurie wasn't invited. Harry had heard she'd gotten engaged herself to someone she'd met in Des Moines, a mechanic or a carpenter, someone who worked with his hands and valued simple things. Harry hoped it was real, hoped she'd actually learned, hoped she'd found what she'd been looking for all along, and that it turned out to be what she'd thrown away years ago. But he didn't think about it much. His life had moved on. His story had continued, and it had gotten better in ways that had nothing to do with Lori or her inheritance or the pain she'd caused. He'd learned something important in those dark months after she'd kicked him out. Something about dignity and self-worth and the difference between being discarded and being set free. She'd thought she was getting rid of deadweight when she'd told him to leave. But really, she'd been cutting the anchor that kept her grounded. And Harry had been given the chance to find someone who actually valued what he offered. In the end, they'd both gotten what they deserved. Harry just got it sooner. The day of Harry's second wedding, standing at the altar next to Emily, looking out at the people who'd supported him through everything, Harry felt something settle deep in his chest. Peace. Complete and total peace. He'd survived. He'd rebuilt. He'd found love again with someone who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. Not because he was all she could afford. Not because he was convenient. But because he was exactly what she wanted. The minister asked him to repeat his vows. Harry spoke clearly, meant every word, felt the weight and power of promises made freely, without reservation or doubt. Emily smiled at him, squeezed his hand. Her eyes were bright with happy tears. And Harry smiled back. He'd started his adult life believing that marriage was about endurance, about showing up every day and doing the work and hoping that would be enough. Then he'd learned it wasn't. That sometimes people changed or revealed who they'd always been. That sometimes love wasn't enough to hold two people together when one of them stopped valuing what the other brought to the table. But now, standing here with Emily, Harry understood a third truth. Marriage wasn't about endurance or hope or even love alone. It was about mutual respect, about two people seeing each other's value and choosing to protect it, about building something together that neither person wanted to destroy. That's what had been missing with Lori. Not passion or money or excitement, just basic respect for what he was worth. And once respect died, everything else died with it. But with Emily, respect was the foundation. Everything else they'd build on top of it would be solid, real, lasting. As Harry slipped the ring onto Emily's finger, he felt the ghost of his first marriage finally release its hold on him. He was free, completely free. Not because Lori had lost everything. Not because karma had caught up with her. Not because he'd gotten revenge or satisfaction or justice. But because he'd chosen his own dignity over her need. He'd protected his own worth when someone else tried to diminish it. He'd walked away from a situation that would have destroyed him, even when walking away looked cold or cruel or heartless to people who didn't understand. He'd save himself, and in doing so, he'd created space for something better. The ceremony concluded. Everyone applauded. Emily kissed him. They walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, into a future they'd built on honest ground. Outside, the sun was shining. The air smelled like spring flowers and new grass. People were laughing and taking pictures and celebrating two people who'd found each other at exactly the right time. Harry looked at Emily, saw her joy, her confidence, her complete lack of doubt about the life they were building together. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that this was what happiness felt like. Not winning, not revenge, not watching someone else fail. Just peace, just contentment, just the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived and choices well made. He'd lost his first marriage, lost his home, lost 12 years to someone who didn't value what he offered. But he hadn't lost himself. And in the end, that was the only thing that really mattered.